Hey guys, it's Markets with May, and in this 5-part series, we're going to review why is the SEC suing Coinbase and Binance, and what does it mean? Now, some of you are probably like, May, seriously, 5 episodes in order to explain what's going on with this lawsuit? And I am going to say that, yeah, you need them. This whole lawsuit is so complicated and requires that you have significant background knowledge, but I'll tell you what, it's starting to look like an episode of Inventing Anna. It is that exciting and intriguing what precisely is going on. Now, let's talk about the 5 episodes, and then we'll give the disclosures and then get into episode 1. Episode 1, I'm going to talk about staking, the Howie test, and why the SEC has such a problem that Coinbase and Binance are not registered and doing this activity. In episode 2, I'm going to talk about why the SEC is so mad that there's no separation between the broker-dealer, the exchange, and the clearing organization, and the types of graft historically that has happened, and also what they believe the whistleblowers are telling them is happening at Binance. Now, by virtue of that, they're also concerned it's happening at Coinbase. In episode 3, we're going to talk about what exactly is it that Binance is doing and not disclosing that has the SEC so upset. And in this one, we're going to talk about what the whistleblowers are saying from the lawsuit filing, as well as the implication that maybe FTX is also tattletaling a bit. Now, in episode 4, we're going to examine the rumors that suggest that the only reason the SEC is suing Coinbase is because Coinbase had sued the SEC. Now, in episode 5, I'm going to do a bit of cleanup that I've always wanted to do, which is just describe the difference between the exchanges and the coins. Because in fairness to the SEC, despite all of the noise, it seems like these documents are concerned with the exchanges and not crypto specifically itself. In that episode, we're going to talk about 3 types of coins, and I'm also going to describe the difference between coins and tokens so y'all don't get mad at me. But before we get into that, past performance is not indicative of future returns. I don't have a position currently in coin, but I will say that if we don't get better responses from Coinbase and Binance, I could probably be short coin on a given day, especially when you're watching this. So realize that my bias, if I don't see something better than what I'm seeing thus far, is to be short. I will also disclose, because it's relevant to this entire discussion, that I am long BITO, which is a Bitcoin ETF, and I have some Satoshis, so Bitcoin, Ethereum, and XRP. Now, I'm mentioning my crypto because, quite frankly, being pro-crypto and pro the existing exchanges in the United States as they are currently structured, that's not the same thing. And just for a very detailed comparison, LedgerX, which was regulated under the CFTC, it's FTX's US branch, everyone got their assets back. That's very different from FTX International, which John J. Ray is still trying to unwind. Now, let's talk about staking, the Howie Rule, and why the SEC has such a problem. Now, first, let's talk about what the SEC is saying staking is and why that might be misunderstood by customers. A lot of customers think that staking your coin is similar to like buying a money market mutual fund or a CD. Now, let's be really precise, and this is what the SEC documentation says. They're saying that when you give Coinbase or Binance your Ethereum, Binance or Coinbase owns that, and while they're electronically marking in your account that you have ownership, the fact is, for all intents and purposes, they own it. So then when they give it to the validator, it's unclear whether or not they actually, number one, do that according to the SEC. And in the case of Binance, there's some whistleblowers that are showing they do not, in fact, do that. But also, what happens if one of the many coins in the pool blows up in a blaze of glory? Like when I look at the Coinbase website, you just wouldn't get an interest payment and the coins are still marked through, so the coin that blew up would take the loss and that would be it. Now, the SEC has a couple of concerns there. The first is, well, what if more than one coin blows up at the same time? Are you going to try to sell the coins at the same time and just create a massive house of cards scenario across all of the coins that you've pooled together. And that goes to really having people understand the potential loss in staking. Looks to me like what Coinbase is saying in its documentation and what SEC is showing in its records is that Coinbase will just pay out and has cash to deal with it. And in fact, they do have about $5 billion in cash on the balance sheet, but they, have some debt against that. So it comes to a little bit under $2 billion. But then the SEC has a second concern if you read through both the Binance and the documents for Coinbase, and that is who checks to make sure that the pooled coins are only being used for staking. So if it's the case that the coins are being used for something other than staking to make a return, then if you have the house of cards scenario, there may not be a one-for-one between the people that own the coins and the people that have staked the coins. Now, I will talk about that significantly more in episode 2 when I go through why it's a problem to have your broker-dealer, your clearinghouse, and your exchange all wrapped in the same entity. But to make it a little bit more digestible for some of the folks that are very familiar with short selling, it's a little bit like lending the stock and not having a locate. So in other words, they see one of the issues as if there's no third party to really make sure that when you give them your shares, that you also have those shares to give back to the customer, then you can absolutely end up in a scenario where you have less shares than customers who you need to give them back to. And Coinbase is saying, no, we got enough cash where we can cover it. Do you? This is a concern that the SEC has in general, but for Binance, this is something the whistleblowers seem to identify was happening. I would mention, though, that the real issue that has the SEC suing is that staking as a service does not pass the Howie Rule, and therefore it is the offering of a security. The Howie test is the test that determines whether or not something is a security. Now, they pretend like this is gray, but we're gonna walk through what the Howie test is, and you can see it's not gray at all. Now, this goes all the way back to 1946. SEC versus W.J. Howie. And ironically, there was a guy named W.J. Howie, is a town named after him called Howie in the Hills. And it happens to actually be not so far from where I grew up. So oddly enough, I'm somewhat familiar with this case. It's not that far outside of Orlando. And this whole area when I was growing up was orange groves. But because of El Nino and other things, oranges don't quite grow there any longer. But oranges in 1946 were big business. In fact, they were definitively a speculative product. And if you're confused about that, you can watch one of my favorite trading movies, Trading Places. Now in that movie, Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy play a trick on the Duke brothers to get even by cornering the OJ market. But back to our story, the ever clever W.J. Howie decided what he would do to make a profit off the land was to sell the land to northern investors, parcel by parcel. And then those northern investors, Yankees as we call them in Central Florida, would essentially lease the land back to W.J. Howie. And then he would plant oranges all across everything. And instead of allocating the oranges to the plots of land from which they were sold, everybody would just get a percentage of the profits based on all of the oranges that were sold. Sounds like it would have just been him getting a contract to manage land or manage property. But because each parcel made a different yield of oranges and the oranges weren't allocated to the specific parcel of land, but just as a percentage of what was paid in, this is 100% a security. So in other words, if he had been like 36,000 oranges goes to plot 2, 50,000 oranges goes to plot 3, it would have been fine. But instead he was like, we sold 80,000 oranges, you put in half, I'm splitting it that way. That's a security. Now to review what happened in the Howie test, number 1, Mr. Howie sold land to investors. Number 2, he had all the investors lease him back the land. Number 3, he used the pool of land to generate revenue, which he then, number 4, allocated to the investors, not according to their parcel, but according to their buy-in. Now let's compare that to staking. Number one, the crypto exchange sells you coins. Number two, you lend your coins back, which they are then put into a pool of coins. Number three, the pool of coins is then used to generate a profit. Number four, you get a rate of return associated with that profit. Given how similar these two things are, that's why staking does not pass the Howie test. The last thing I'm going to talk about is why is the SEC so upset? People raise money all the time and don't do these elaborate SEC registrations, and that is true. However, when people raise capital, they still have to comply with SEC law, and that has to do with solicitation. Now, if you're a startup and you're raising capital, you'll go to a venture fund or you'll go to friends and family, and those under the SEC, no problem. But if you were to advertise it in some crazy way and then offer securities, the SEC gonna come knock on your door. And that's especially the case given the sheer raw size of what's being staked right now at Coinbase and Binance. Now, lest there be a confusion, the SEC doesn't have a problem with staking in and of itself. And in fact, staking or proof of stake is an important innovation for blockchain in general. A given individual can stake their own coin. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it's absolutely something that one can do by themselves. It's the disclosures associated with doing this type of offering. The exchanges, broadly speaking, do KYC, but they don't necessarily make sure that the people that are staking would be accredited investors fully able to understand what's going on. And understanding what's going on means understanding that there's the potential that your assets being pulled together, you may or may not get them back, or that you may also be taking the loss of other assets should there be a run on that crypto. Now again, the exchanges are saying that they will backstop your coin, but given how quickly some of the exchanges have gone from this gigantic financial behemoth to nothing, and the SEC doesn't believe that most investors understand that their coin, let's say Ethereum, is wrapped together with a bunch of other coins, Solana, etc. And the SEC also doesn't believe that most investors understand that Coinbase is taking a fairly large commission to do this process. Now you can see with some of the coins it's as high as 35%. However, the other oddity that's in the documentation is that these profits may not be running through Coinbase, but are actually running straight up to the parent company, CGI. Now, I will link in the show notes to the SEC document so you can look at both of these areas that the SEC has concerns on, but specifically with the staking program, there's also a lack of disclosure, even if you were reading the 10K, to understand precisely when, how, and what is staked, and also how the rewards flow through to the investors for which coins are being borrowed. Now, this is all accentuated by the fact that the broker-dealer, the exchange, and the clearinghouse are all the same entity. But we're going to talk about that in the next episode. Now, if that's something you'd like to know more about, definitely watch my next video and hit the subscribe button for notifications.